Mick Langridge is going to run us through sourcing materials and in particular packaging in Western Australia, which is pretty challenging given we are a million miles from anywhere.
So sorry we've had to do this. It is fairly brief too, so I won't be going exhaustive on every bit of packaging that is out there in the world of sparkling. Most of you involved in the wine industry have probably had a pretty decent journey and a shot at that over the years and worked with different suppliers and have an understanding of some of the challenges and the cost and reward benefits of sort of hunting down packaging from far and wide. I think the perspective I'll take is a bit of a case study of a new brand. Idee Fixe is, I guess, a 6-year-old brand, 4 years in market, so very fresh compared to most of the brands that we know and drink. I guess I should start by saying my role is currently as general manager of a group that is Idee Fixe and this new sparkling wine brand, Idee Fixe. So they're two very separate things. Idee Fixe, obviously the heritage brand that's been around for 50 plus years, and Idee Fixe, entirely new concept, new site, new winery, new vineyards, new team. So I should really point that out, that there's a real focus with the Idee Fixe project and brand to just really zero in on one thing, and that is Blanc de Blancs and ultra premium sparkling, sort of coming out of some Idee Fixe heritage, which goes back to the early 1980s. So just touching on that so we know where I'm going with the packaging decisions and the brand decisions. We've got Idee Fixe having started making traditional method wines somewhere in the early 80s, possibly 1982 from what I can gather, certainly 1984 selling it, moving through those decades in a series of winemakers. All of this fruit going to Idee Fixe was from Great Southern, Pemberton, Manjimup. It was Pinot Noir, Meunier, Chardonnay as we moved through. It wasn't until 2010 Idee Fixe purchased a new vineyard down in Carradale in the south, right down in the south of Margaret River on the Blackwood, kind of out in the outskirts away from the traditional gravelly ridge where all of the still wine is grown. And after making wine at Idee Fixe for 2 years, we kind of gave up on the idea of using the Chardonnay off that vineyard for the still wine program and swung it across to a Blanc de Blancs program because it was just ripening and appearing and tasting so much like sparkling base. We'd been sold the vineyard under the premise that it was all gingin. First season told us pretty quickly that it wasn't. We had several clones, all big berried, and subsequent research really started to expose what those clones were, and we realised we had 4 or 5 clones, non-gingin. We now have 9 on the one property down in Carradale, including gingin, a tiny amount for salt and pepper, but 8 other Chardonnay clones, and in fact 2 Pinot Noir clones, so 11 clones. And that vineyard is quite unique, soil type completely different, and has really, it's been the reason we've ended up here. We didn't at Idee Fixe decide to start a sparkling brand for sales opportunity reasons, for marketing reasons. The fruit really spoke to us and said, you know, I want to be Blanc de Blancs. And so that's what we started doing. And we did that for 6 consecutive vintages at Idee Fixe as a Idee Fixe Blanc de Blancs, breaking that decades-old tradition of blending from outside the region. And we really decided, let's embrace, you know, we're a Margaret River producer, let's embrace the region and what we might have down here in this cooler, cloudier, southern, sort of light, sand over clay site that we have. So different to everything else we were growing. So we started making the wine was working, the wine was doing well. There came a point where we had to turn our mind to launching this thing, and unbeknownst to most of us in the brand as winemakers and others associated, our owner, Paul Holmescourt, already had a name. He'd had it up his sleeve for many, many years. Quirky name, Idee Fixe. Those who speak fluent French will appreciate that it is referencing a fixation, an obsession with something that you just can't let go. That's what the Idee Fixe is. It's this obsession with chasing down Southern Margaret River, Carradale, clonal Chardonnay and turning it into Blanc de Blancs, and the entire journey, everything to do with the viticulture, the wine making. And I guess then we worked internally. We have a great brand and marketing team in the business, and they are quite skilled at doing the market research and really assessing where will this wine sit in market? What does it really need to hit out there to engage people? We had the wine style that was already set, but we had to tell the story. And so sparkling, more than just about any other wine type, I think really leans on packaging a lot, leans on the look and feel and the experience when you're drinking the wines. It's got to help tell the story. It's got to engage you in that moment of celebration. So we set ourselves some clear brand pillars, and it's quite an extensive process, but we really wanted to make sure that we were saying about the brand and delivering about the brand that it was traditional method, obviously, first and foremost. So Chardonnay specialisation being Margaret River. That we're from Southern Margaret River in a new quadrant down in the southeast towards the Scott River Plains. And that ultimately, if those two brand messages were too high or too difficult to get across, that we simply must get across that it sits in the ultra-premium sparkling segment, that it was competing at the higher end, because cost of production is significant and it's a real challenge for us. Yield is nowhere near as high coastally as it can be continentally, and the soils there are not as generous and deep and healthy. So we do all sorts of things to deliver high quality sparkling wine, but we have to sort of lean heavily into all of the messaging to make sure people understand where we're coming from, that we're quite unique, that we're quite different. So the packaging decisions around that, embracing that uniqueness of where we're from, and delivering on that classic Blanc de Blancs kind of message of purity, elegance, focus of vision, one variety. And finally, just generally a sense of luxury, that the look, the feel, the touch points all back up the brand message, back up the value. First decision, the most important decision in our mind, and this is where there were long-running battles between myself and marketing, and marketing clearly won, because you can see the shape of the bottle we've got there. And if you've seen this bottle out in market, yeah, it stands out. So a very traditional old world champagne bottle shape. Stumpy, short, round, wide-shouldered. And the discussions around the production challenges of that were exhaustive. We knew there would be challenges. There would be challenges in fitting out wineries, in packaging, in freight, in everything. But we also knew we had to deliver a product that absolutely hit those brand messages. So we weighed it up. We looked at all the bottles available in Australia. We looked at all the bottles we could get our hands on from around the world. And to launch, we settled on a European a stock bottle that was available, that ticked all of the boxes, and was also supplied in half bottle, and Magnum, which was a bonus for us launching a new sparkling brand. And that's very rare, particularly in an unusual shape. So the idea of creating a proprietary mould at that time crossed our minds. We spoke to the main glass manufacturers in Australia, and the barriers were significant back in 2017, 2018 to achieving that. In fact, impossible, given we were after this unique shape, and it simply couldn't be done in the plants in Australia at the time. Main reason is the width of the bottle at that size, which is getting quite technical, but we were told it could be done, but at extremely high cost. So we went with the European bottle, still challenging, expensive, freight issues, which didn't sit well. Just knowing that you really need to be on your ordering, have the stock on hand for tirage. You can't be caught short. The glass is a long way away. This particular shape only gets fired twice a year in Europe. And the same with the 375s and the Magnum. So huge challenge, but we took it on. One of the main challenges, and we've spoken about riddling, with this bottle was there are no off-the-shelf gyro programs, and it's hard to get them out of Ruinart and Laurent Perrier and these sorts of people who've been working with these bottles for a while. I spoke to a few producers in Champagne over the years who gave me the heads up on a couple of key points, dug into a lot of research. And what I was fearful of with this bottle and riddling was the shoulder and the neck, very narrow neck, very wide shoulder. Ultimately, the biggest challenge with all sparkling bottles I find is, unless it's got a red stripe through the glass, and it impedes yeast moving down the inside, which is even more insane than this bottle, but is the punt. And the way the punt behaves, if you've got a deep punt, the riddling program in the early stages has to be so precise to get that yeast off that punt, join the yeast correctly on the wall and start the journey. You don't want to start the journey of yeast in multiple pieces, 2, 3, 4 pieces, because it'll never really quite catch up and it can turn into a disaster as it goes down the neck. The whole point is to get it all together really neatly, and that punt is actually a significant challenge there. So we moved on with that bottle, several years, tiraging successfully. We had to create, obviously, a label, the entire packaging concept around the wine, brand image, logo, a lot of work there, starting absolutely from scratch. Not something we drifted into over decades, but something we put a lot of work into. And this was an area where, obviously, we could work really well with local label suppliers and label artists, brand designers, and the quality of label stock in Australia is actually exceptional. It's really high, the finished quality of labels across all products. I've found in my years researching really good quality stock, but often paper stock and backing stock's produced overseas, sadly. So we've got a bit of a way to go there, I think, in labelling in Australia if we're to improve that. Box production in Australia, board production is also huge options there, and I'm sure everyone here has worked with main players in the supply of boxes. But while getting recycled content in your boxes in Australia is certainly quite achievable, I think that's a significant goal for us as a producer. Some of the processes in finishing for this ultra premium level, what we feel we have to deliver in terms of the finished packaging goods, we're still challenged at that price point domestically, unfortunately. The options are there, but there's such a gap. We're working towards bridging that and getting closer to all of our box production, as with our label production coming back on shore. And we have it mixed at the moment. We have a bit of both. But the lithographic process that we need and the finish on some of our cartons still at the moment just requires us to be offshore, and that's a key focus, is to work with suppliers there to get that back. Hoods, quite a similar story. The range of sparkling hoods out there in the market, quite wide. Quality levels vary pretty widely too. Certainly, I think the hood experience, the hood is a marker of a sparkling wine. You see it on a bottle from a distance. You sort of get that sense of the foil. You know you're looking at a bottle of bubbles. It's really critical, and it's also a lot of real estate for branding. So quite important colour tones and those sorts of things from a distance to mark your product, be it retail or on a table in this sort of environment. It's quite often from 20 metres you can pick a bottle of bubbles by its hood colour, shape, the design of the bottom of it. So really important to take time selecting that, and design of hoods, a little more limited in the actual shape and design. Materiality is improving all of the time, and that range of quite thin tin through to quite thick polylam hoods, which is where we've landed for, again, I guess, backing up that value proposition for the wine, is that slightly denser polylaminate aluminium based foil hood, because the sensory experience of opening those is shown to be quite significant in people's appreciation or sense of value of the product that they're actually opening when it comes to sparkling wines. So that is something that we will be bringing back on shore, and when we started the project, you can get very good quality hoods made in Australia, and we have used Australian hoods, and in terms of their actual, the quality of the good itself, it's very similar. Price is always the issue, but tooling in Australia for the top of the hoods around the bottle for ultra premium wines has been, in my opinion, a bit lacking, and just behind the 8 ball of what's been available in a couple of markets overseas for some really premium, soft finishes. That's now changing. I think the last thing to change that will really nail it is just this fully recyclable plant-based hoods, which are coming on. So it's something all producers should look at and talk to your suppliers about, is, you know, moving across to that sort of basis for your hood material, because a lot of hoods aren't recyclable, but they are if they're vegetable based. Closures, I guess, look, when it comes to the use of bidules, crown seals, very unsexy. They're kind of requirements of the traditional method process. Bidules, I've trialled with and without as well to try and move away from bidules, and there may be producers here who've happily made traditional methods without them, or different versions, or in-cap bidules. We've found certainly just greater clarity and consistency by sticking with the bidule process. 29mm crown seals, as Nick mentioned, you've got different permeability options there, which we've got trialling in the cellars. And, you know, I think that is a really important place to focus, is to look at what your supplier's got and, you know, really focus in on whether you think you're going to be laying the wine down for 2 years, 4, 6, because it's super critical to, I think, avoid, or it depends on how oxidative you're making your wine in the first place, but to choose the correct crown seal for that cellar time. And the difference is quite noticeable over a 2 to 3 year period, starts to show up pretty clearly. And I think over 4 to 5 years, with a highly permeable versus a non, then they're totally different wines. They really are separating. Cork is, well, it's, yeah, you could have a whole symposium on cork. And I've used everything over the years. Again, I lean heavily towards Diam and the compact TD3 type products that are proven to be basically taint-free in the sense of TCA. They are super consistent across the board on your products. Are they super respectful of a very fine wine? I think they do a great job, and probably the better of two evils. You'd certainly prefer the consistency, reliability, not just consistency and a lack of taint, but in tension, oxygen permeability of this sort of product. However, I note there that we've also used a lot of natural cork over the years, and when we do blind tastings on high-end, say, single parcel, single block, blanc de blancs that we've made, aged for a few years, under 5, 6, 7 different corks, it's usually the double disc premium top grade cork that the winemakers go to and rate the highest. And maybe that's just winemakers making those decisions, because they're right into a faint element of toastiness and tannin and phenolic edge that comes into the wines. But the wines to us, if they're a beautiful, pristine, bright wine, they seem to marry in with the cork really well, and they've been made well. They seem to marry in and actually lift and elevate and look really pure and bright under a very good natural cork. They're going to look horrible under a bad natural cork, but you know, cork performance has certainly improved. You're still going to get bitten. So interesting space, and for us, probably willing to lean towards the risk on wines that are hand sold at our estate, sold in a restaurant by a som, or drunk by knowledgeable wine drinkers who are willing to pick up the phone and say, I've got a spoiled bottle here. So, you know, it's weird to think you take a greater risk on your high-end product, but that is kind of the approach that we would take with cork. And muesles are muesles. They can be pretty cool and funky, and there's, I think, millions of people who collect them, weirdly, have buckets of them and pin them to places. So don't underestimate the value of a really cool, embossed, glossy, shiny muesli in your packaging and the effect it can have on lying around someone's house. They actually are a weird collectible item. So all sorts of other little packaging touch points, but for us, I started with our decision to go with quite a unique bottle shape, challenging bottle shape. A few years in, and sort of revisiting those less than ideal parts of choosing an unusual bottle, being cost, lead times, freight, the sustainability around the freight, the carbon footprint, and I think some issues with the neck narrowness, the shoulder, what we had. We went back to Visy, who we were working with a lot, and started the process of developing our own mould. And long-winded process, 2 years in fact, but things had changed, and fortunately for us, and this goes for Aurora as well, there's the ability to engage with the major glass makers in Australia now and do a deal on glass moulds for your brand at much smaller numbers and at a surprisingly lower cost than it was even 5 years ago. And I remember trying to do proprietary moulds 15 years ago for still wine, and it was a 15 to 20 year payback. It was ridiculous. The paybacks now are in single-digit number of years in what you can achieve in terms of, we think, savings, but exponentially brand value. If you really want to separate a product, or in the special club concept, Gimene, if you wanted to gather together a whole lot of producers in one region, or of one tier, or one wine style, or vintage versus non-vintage, there are ways to maybe brand, not just a brand, but a wine style within sparkling or a concept in Australia, and not at enormous cost. And if you bring a number of producers together, it would actually be a no-brainer. We went the whole hog, created a new mould, new shape, lots of engineering, lots of detailed work, particularly given that it's there's another term, 7 gas volume, as opposed to 7 bar, as opposed to 700 kPa. There's dozens of these pressure ratings. 7 versus 5 being traditional method. So the challenge was to create a new bottle that only has to hold 5 bar or below is not that hard. And a still wine bottle, it's really easy. To create a new sparkling shape, it's an unusual shape, is very stressful, with enormous capacity for failure on Visy initially, and then on us, because we go and put all of our product in it and wait years. So we've now got several bottlings in this bottle, and I'm happy to say it's holding pressure well and not failing at any greater rate than any other sparkling bottle I've ever had has failed, and they all do fail a little bit, but it's worked. So the process was conversation, shape, improvements. We had to do a lot of technical drawings, engineers working on pressure ratings, punt, all sorts of potential issues that can go wrong. And then 3D bottle production sent back, which we assess from a marketing, branding point of view, as well as production point of view, look at the production challenges. Finally, we get to a point where there's enough capacity to make a single mould and some test bottles are fired. That bottle you sign off on, but it's the wrong colour. The punt's not actually the same because it's not a full production, so you've got to roll the dice there and go, it's near enough. And then eventually, full production run, which is the only time you'll ever see the bottle in its final state. So that bottle was first done in November 2023 and has been done subsequently by Visy. It is a double gob process, which that is actually a video on the right. I'm glad I remembered. If you can see around the post and whatnot, this is courtesy of Breno, who was at this firing and took this amazing footage with his iPhone. So you can see there liquid molten glass getting shot into the pre-mould and getting its initial shape, and then it gets flipped over and high pressure air comes in and blows it into the proper mould, the final mould shape, blows the glass out to the sides, spitting out a bottle about every 25 seconds from every mould. And there are 36 of these moulds that ended up being made to handle our production, which all sit on a shelf all year and they pull out once and load up the machines. So out it comes. This is the same method for any bottle, except the bottle's so wide, it's only 2 bottles at a time, not 3, which is very common. 3 bottles usually shoot down. That was one of the challenges for Visy, was just to do 2 at a time in that mould process. Bottles being rejected. First couple of runs, they're always going to hit quite a few faults. And they're checking for wall thickness, angle of shoulder, angle of neck, just any faint faults. And they reject quite a lot of glass in the first run. This is the bottle still hot, still glowing hot, but being pushed into the pizza oven, getting its curing process. So it's been moulded, but it actually now needs to be recooked to really set the chemistry in the glass and make sure it's tough enough to handle the pressure. And eventually it peels out, palletised up, and off it goes. And the consistency is great. In fact, the consistency of that shape is far superior to what we're getting out of the largest glass manufacturer in the world, in France, who were making the previous bottle. The variation in bottle and imperfections in the bottle were, I would say, 2 to 3 times higher than when you go over these bottles with a microscope. So it's really, yeah, I'm an advocate for the quality of what they're doing. And, you know, I'd say the same, we've worked with Aurora as well, but certainly Visi have done a great job with us helping to develop this, and we really think it's had a massive impact on getting the story out there of Idee Fixe. Brand new brand. We have leveraged off of existing distribution, awareness of market. You know, we're selling Vas Felix around Australia and the world. So for us, we had a foot in the door with a new brand, but this is the sort of lengths, I think, for ultra premium sparkling. And by that I mean probably the modern definition of ultra premium is a lot higher than the old original one. I'm talking $50 to $100 range bottles of wine. Ultra premium variously in the past in Australia has been anything above $15 or $20, but these days I think we're talking for ultra premium sparkling 50, 60, 70, 80, 100 and above, and there is a market in that space, and if you get everything set up correctly and you hit the touch points, and you're using obviously contract facilities for a lot of the capital intensive machinery and so on, then, you know, I think you can deliver a product that people are happy to pay for, as long as the look, the feel, the touch all is backed up by an amazing wine behind it. Whoops. And yeah, that's what we're hoping that we're doing, and it seems to be the case. So any queries about any of that, come and see me later on.